To say I've been putting off making this video long after I was asked is something of an understatement. There might not have been a more fraught issue in the entire Warhammer 40,000 fandom. I've been part of the Warhammer 40k fandom for over 20 years, and in that time I've seen more and more new lore added in, old lore retconned, and races that never existed or were eaten by the Tyranids returning. So let's dive in, let's talk about it. Why female Space Marines could, and if not should, exist. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, the Space Marines, or as we're supposed to call them, the Adeptus Astartes, are genetically engineered super soldiers who serve the Imperium of Man. The long-standing law states that all Space Marines are male due to their transformation process being incompatible with female biology. However, upon closer examination of the law and genetic engineering principles, as we know them, you can argue that female Space Marines could exist, and by extension, it's frankly quite stupid that they don't. Now, we aren't going to talk about any of the chaos, particularly Chaos and Iron Warriors related thoughts on female Space Marines. We're just going to talk about the Imperial side of things, because we don't want to touch on any of that. The Emperor of Mankind, the most powerful human psyker, scientific genius who created the 20 Primarchs using advanced genetic engineering. Given his mastery over human genetics, the idea that he would limit the compatibility of gene seed to only one group is counterintuitive. Elements of the law, including Malcador's female Primarch comment, tells her that it was a consideration and that had the Emperor heeded Malcador's counsel in this, would likely have been the reality. The Emperor, and also other masters around him, have shown the ability to alter and manipulate genetics in ways beyond current human understanding. As seen with the Primarch's distinct genetic deviations, not including the warp magics that were employed in their creation, this implies that restricting the gene seed process to only males was not a necessity but a choice, or perhaps an oversight. Certainly, limiting the creation of your greatest warriors to half the population is greatly limiting. Even the endless numbers of humanity is reduced by 50%. People make the argument that natural male testosterone production plays a large part in why only men could be Space Marines, but this just isn't correct. Testosterone introduced into any body will cause the increase in mass and muscle growth required. You could add it to a banana and it would come out with biceps like a tree and abs you could grate rocks on. Just look at the Custodes, for example. It's frequently stated that the gene seed is derived from the Primarchs, who were male, and therefore only integrates into male recruits. However, this doesn't align with what we know of genetic engineering principles within the Warhammer 40k universe. If the gene seed fundamentally alters human physiology, it would be able to work on all subjects, providing the necessary modifications were made. Other gene-based enhancement is not limited to just one group. Other enhanced individuals exist and continue to be created by the Imperium. Whilst the Adeptus Sororitas are not genetically modified, they demonstrate that an all-female fighting force can be highly trained, effective warriors with superior endurance and combat ability. Through training and war gear, they are far greater than your standard Imperial fighting force such as the Guard, and even the more highly trained regiments. Furthermore, the Sisters of Silence are enhanced psyker hunting warriors who are empowered by the Emperor's design. Whilst not physically modified in the way that the Astartes are, they serve as evidence that the Imperium does not inherently reject enhanced female warriors. The Custodes, unlike the Astartes, are individually handcrafted with genetic modifications that surpass the Space Marines. Whilst the existence of female Custodes is something of a contention within the fandom, they do exist. And by their existence, they prove that genetic enhancements on female subjects is possible, up to and beyond that of a space marine. If female custodies can exist, and again, they do, then female space marines should not be impossible, as gene seed modification is a lesser form of the Emperor's genetic engineering. It was once stated that the finely handcrafted process of creating a custodes is the peak of this engineering, whereas the Space Marine is the off-the-line, mass-produced version of this sort of genetic tampering. Ultimately, the Imperium is an empire in decline, constantly seeking new ways to defend itself, especially now, given the era Indomitus. Given its dire need for soldiers, it is illogical that it would reject half of its potential superhuman warriors purely based on outdated dogma. The Imperium has historically reversed policies where necessary, such as reintroducing lost technologies through rediscovery or adapting old doctrines when survival demands it, and the current things with Rabute Gilliam in charge, where he has very much shaken up the orders of the Imperium, and also all of the various things brought forward by Belisarius Cawl, would suggest there is a lot of space with which to be able to change things up in such a way. There is an argument within the community of, if you're going to have female space marines, does that mean you're going to have male sisters of battle or sisters of silence or any sort of argument like that? This is, of course, argumentative bollocks and not really worth the time of day. But if we had to briefly talk on it, then we could look at examples of how Forces of the Sisters does have options of male characters, such as priests, and units that aren't the sisters themselves, though a greater argument would come from the law of the Adeptus Sororitas being founded in the Age of Blood following the Vandaya heresy, and the imperial law banning the ecclesiarchy from maintaining men under arms. A wonderful workaround for the sisters, and not something that is an issue with the ranks of the Space Marines. Now let's get into a little fan theorying, with the Lost Legions and the possibility of female Primarchs. The existence of the two Lost Primarchs remains a mystery, and one that will likely never be solved within the 40k universe. Some fans speculate that one or both may have been female, as their erasure from history is suspiciously thorough. If even one of these Primarchs was female, it would be proof that female space marines were possible, and that their exclusion was a later political or cultural decision, rather than the biological impossibility. Mistakes within the development of the Primarchs certainly happen. After all, it's not fully clear if the Emperor intended for Alpharos and Megon to be twins, or whether it was just genetic aberration during their growth and division of cells that led to the natural creation of twins. The idea that one or more of the Primarchs could have developed as female is not far beyond imagination, and was the original intention with the two missing Primarchs, for fans to create their own legions with their own lore to fit within the already established Space Marine chapters and legions. Early Rogue Trader lore does include female Space Marines. There are models that exist of female-appearing Space Marines. It was simply something that was not carried forward. And there are references to female Space Marines, but again, this was later retconned. This indicates that Games Workshop initially considered the idea, but changed direction as the setting evolved. This is likely due to the intended audience of Warhammer at the time, being the 90s in this case. With young males being the target range for the game, the idea of genetically enhanced super soldiers, male specifically, was in all likelihood a more attractive idea. You just have to look at the number of older female models from around the same time, such as the demonettes or the slaves on Vex barge to understand what gaze the creators were aiming for, a thing Games Workshop has worked hard to correct in later editions of the game. In a franchise that has evolved significantly over the decades, including female Space Marines would make the lore more inclusive and engaging to a broader audience without breaking established themes. Certainly, if you take a look across the wide range of individuals that are currently part of the Warhammer 40k fandom, it is a vast collection of every aspect of humanity and is a wonderful thing to see. Ultimately, what it comes down to is if Games Workshop ever want to introduce female Space Marines into the game, they will do so. Lore will adapt to fit them in and explain away the reasons behind their creation and the need for their existence. If such a thing does happen, much like many cases with businesses, it is because Games Workshop believes it is a profitable thing for them to do. If it was, it's simple business. The restrictions of female Space Marines to only male recruits is ultimately based on tradition and the Emperor's misplaced ideals, something that he certainly had a lot of at the time, than biological necessity. He stated that he wanted to create a brotherhood and that he believed that the bonds of men under fire was going to be a greater thing that would create the Space Marine legions and make them more powerful together. Whether or not this is true is for contention, but this is ultimately why the Emperor wanted to make male Space Marines, for that band of brother mentality. The Imperium's vast knowledge of genetics, the existence of female-enhanced warriors, and the flexibility of the lore suggest that female Space Marines could exist. Whether through rediscovered technology, revised genetic engineering, or a general shift in the Imperium's needs, it's entirely possible to justify the inclusion within Warhammer 40k canon. There is entirely the possibility, and I'm purely just speculating here, with the addition of the Primaris Marines, cooked for 10,000 years beneath the surface of Mars with Belisarius' Call, he could just turn round at any single point and just say, yeah, I use female recruits. Why wouldn't I have done that? I needed a huge number of new recruits for my Primaris, so why would I restrict myself? Yeah, they're amongst you right now. No, you can't tell. They're wearing huge amounts of Mark 10 power armor. And what would be the argument?